All right, Rabbosai, good morning. Let us begin. Let's begin by thanking our sponsors for this morning's share. To thank our TALMUD Torah sponsors for the month of Adar Aleph, Paul and Kathy Pollack, for dedicating all of the shiurim and drushos this month in memory of Paul's grandparents, Zechariah Ben Zechariah and Dinah Bas Rab Dov. To thank Art and Sherry Miller for dedicating all of the shiurim and drushos this month in memory of Art's brother, Richard Miller, Reuven Ben Betzalel, V'Rachel, Zichron Livracha. We hope that in the merit of our TALMUD Torah, the Neshamas will have an aliyah and the families a nechama. We thank our week of learning sponsors, Ayal and Sara Steinberg, for the refuah sheleimah of Shulamis Bas Susha. And we thank our day of learning sponsors, Ephraim Shifra Abramson, in commemoration of the yahrzeit of Ephraim's mother and Moishe's grandmother, Chava Bas Moshe Shalom. Zechariah Livrach. We hope that in the merit of our TALMUD Torah, the Neshama will have an aliyah and the family a nechama. But with that, let us begin. We have a lot to do today. Beautiful, beautiful Gemara ahead of us. Really exceptional Gemara ahead of us. We have a little bit of catching up. So today's daf is Tes Vav 15. We are picking up on Yud Dalid Amud Beis, and let's just back up just a little bit. Let's begin in the wide lines. 3 lines into the wide lines on 14b. Yud Dalid Amud Beis. We'll go quickly. Supposed to remember again in yesterday's daf. We saw the dramatic story of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai traveling together with his Talmud, Rabbi Elazar ben Arach, and ultimately, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai traveling together with his Talmud, Rabbi Elazar ben Arach, and discussing Ma'aser Merkava. Rabbi Elazar ben Arach discussing Ma'aser Merkava and the incredible scene that came about when Rabbi Elazar ben Arach started espousing on this esoteric body of Torah. So the Gemara goes on and says, when this story was told over in front of Rabbi Yoshua, Hayohu v'Rabbi Yossi HaKohen mahalchin baderech. So Rabbi Yoshua and Rabbi Yossi HaKohen were traveling on the road. Amru af anu nijosh b'ma'aser merkava. So they decided, after hearing this incredible story, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, Rabbi Elazar ben Arach, they decided, let's also talk about Ma'aser Merkava. Pasach Rabbi Yoshua v'darash. Rabbi Yoshua began to darshan in Ma'aser Merkava. V'osem t'kufas Tammuz haya. There was Tammuz. Remember again, Tammuz, summertime. The sky quickly filled with clouds. V'nira kimin keshas ba'anan. And ultimately, again, something like a rainbow appeared inside of the clouds. And the malachim, listen to the imagery, the malachim gathered to watch this darshaning of Ma'aser Merkava. They began to watch this learning of Rabbi Yossi HaKohen, Rabbi Yoshua, like people gathered to watch the celebration of a chassan and kala. Rabbi Yossi HaKohen, the Siper Drum Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. So also Rabbi Yossi HaKohen goes back and tells over to Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai what happened when he and Rabbi Yoshua sat down to learn Ma'aser Merkava. So he tells him about, again, the clouds, like the rainbow, the malachim, everything coming around. Va'amar, but also listen to Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai says, Va'amar, Ashreichem va'ashrei yoladetchem. So Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai said, so beautiful, praiseworthy are you, and praiseworthy are the people who birthed you. Ashrei einai shekach ra'u. Praiseworthy are my eyes that they have seen such a thing. V'af ani va'atem b'chalomi. So we're supposed to listen to this, it gets better. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai says, I have to tell you, I had a dream. And in my dream, Misubin hayinu al har Sinai. You could tell a lot about people by what they dream about. Right? So some people dream about vacation, some people dream about money, and some people dream about Har Sinai. Right? So Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai says, in my dream, I dreamt about Har Sinai. V'nitna alinu baskol min hashamayim. And in my dream, a baskol came out and said, Alu lekan. Come up, ascend here, Traklin, Gidolim, Umatzaos, Naos, Mutzaos, Lachem. Again, there's a beautiful dining room. There are beautiful, comfortable couches are set up for you. Atem, Vitalmidechem, Vitalmidei Samidechem, Mizumanim Lekas Shlishis. You, your students, the students of your students are all invited to be part of the third group. I will say, what's the kat shlishis? If you look at Rashi, shalkidos hayoshos lifnei hashchina. So apparently in Shamayim, there's different, I guess like lahabdil boarding groups, right? There's Group A, there's Group B, there's Group C. There's different groups. So ultimately, again, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai says, in my dream, we were part of the third group. They both say, by the way, being part of the third group in front of the Shekhinah is pretty incredible. It's pretty incredible. So this is what Rabbi Yochanan says. So the point over here is Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai says, clearly, your learning of Ma'aser Merkava made a dramatic difference, because at the end of the day, again, the Bas Kol came out. And went ahead and said that you are Mezuman. You are invited to Olam Haba. Pretty incredible. So the Gemara says, Ini, is this so? Now you're going to see what the Gemara is challenging is one point of this story. Vatanya, let's see. Vatanya, we learned in the Brayso. So Rabbi Yosef Yehuda Omer, Shlosha Hartzosein. There were really three times that Ma'aser Merkava was given over. Rabbi Yoshua here to drum thing Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. Rabbi Yoshua gave it over in front of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. Rabbi Akiva here to Litnei Rabbi Yoshua. Right? Rabbi Akiva gave it over in front of Rabbi Yoshua. Hananya ben Chachinoi here to Litnei Rabbi Akiva. V'ilu, both will say, what's the point over here? V'ilu, Rabbi Lazar ben Arach lo kachoshiv. So we'll say, here's what the Gemara is challenging. This entire episode begins with Rabbi Lazar ben Arach telling over Ma'aser Merkava to Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. Yet the Brayso says there are only really 3 times that Ma'aser Merkava was formally conveyed. And Rabbi Lazar ben Arach is not one of the 3. So how do you reconcile this? To which the Gemara says it's not a problem. The artzi va'artzu kamei kachashiv. The Brayso only counts situations where a person gave over Ma'aser Merkava, and Ma'aser Merkava was given over to them as well. So you gave it over, and it was given over to you. The artzi v'lo artzu kamei. But ultimately, again, a situation where you gave it over, but Ma'aser Merkava was not given over to you, lo kachashiv. Ultimately is not reckoned. So apparently, Rabbi Lazar ben Arach gave it over, but it wasn't formally given over to him. That was which is actually interesting to note, because remember, in the story of Rabbi Lazar ben Arach and Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, where does Rabbi Lazar, or to whom does Rabbi Lazar ben Arach attribute his knowledge of Ma'aser Merkava to? To Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. But apparently the Gemara must be referring to some more formal giving over. Okay? But Chananya ben Chachinoi, no one formally gave it over before him, and yet he's reckoned in the tally. The Gemara says, miha kamei man da'artzi. It's true. Ultimately, again, so even though it was never given over formally to him, but nevertheless, ultimately, the artzi miya kamei man the artzi. So somebody who gave it over, so he gave it over in front of someone else who had given it over, or someone else who had given it over gave it over in front of him. So although it wasn't direct, it was indirect, but enough to count them in the tally. Incredible. I will say, here we go. We now come to the incredible story, I will say overwhelming story of Elisha ben Avuya, of Acher. I will say now again, the Gemara is going to be a little bit of a protracted story you're going to see, but watch this. Now I will say, what is this doing here? It's very simple. Remember again, what's the essence of this entire sugi of Ma'aser Merkava? Right? I will say, we're spending so much time on this whole thing of Ma'aser Merkava. Right? The prophetic vision of Yecheskel. What's the takeaway message of the Gemara? So there are 2 takeaways. Right? 2 takeaways. Takeaway number one is there's so much more to the world than what we see. That's number one. We think we often have everything figured out. And the truth is, it's important to be humble enough to recognize I don't have everything figured out. I don't have everything figured out in my own life, let alone everything figured out in the greater world. There's so much more than what we see. And the knowledge that there's so much more should humble us and also should make us more appreciative and connected to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That's number one. Number two is an idea about say that in Ruchnios, and this is an interesting dialectic, because when we speak about spirituality, right, our focus is really always one word that keeps coming up, which is more. Push, grow, do more. There's a danger in that you have to do more, you have to grow, but you have to also stay in your lane. What do I mean by that? is that if a person grows too fast in the wrong ways and seeks out spirituality in a way that's unhealthy for them, it can actually have detrimental effects. I believe Yitzhak Aberditchev brings down this yisod, and he says that the Yaakov Avinu's dream is a sulam mutzav arza v'rosho magia hashamayma. It's a ladder, but the base of the ladder is on the earth, the top of the ladder is in the heavens. So the Rebbe says that dream, of course, is a metaphor for personalistic growth. I'm here on the earth. My goal is to scale the ladder. To get literally again from Eretz to Shamayim, to grow, to self-actualize. But says the Rebbe something so amazing. But the only way to scale a ladder is how one rung at a time. If you try to take 3 rungs at once, chances are you fall. One rung at a time. That in spiritual development, it is so incredibly important to enter into a system of systemic, dynamic growth. If you try to take 5 rungs, you go nowhere. And once you fall hard. You fall hard, one rung at a time. It takes a little bit longer, but ultimately that's the possibility for sustained growth. So the challenge with my Semer Kava is that if a person gets into it and they're not really ready for it, it actually has detrimental effects. So I will say this is the same topic over here. Tana Rabbanan, here we go. Arba'a nichnesu bepardes. We'll say there are 4 people who went into the pardes. Now we'll say pardes itself is something quite amazing. If you take a look at Tosas for just a moment, Tosas says, well, actually look at Rashi. Machlokes Rashi Tosas here. Nichnesu lepardes alu l'rakia al yedei shem. According to Rashi, pardes is somewhere in Shamayim, somewhere in the celestial sphere. These 4 individuals, through the use of the ineffable name of Hashem, actually left this world and went into Shamayim. That's what they did. Alu Shamayim. Tosas says, Nichnesu lepardes, kegon al yedei shem, v'lo alu l'mala mamish, ela hayanira lahem kimasha alu. So we'll say, Machlokes Rashi Tosas. Rashi says they literally transcended this world and went into the world to come. They left this world. Tosas says they didn't go anywhere, but rather, again, they had more of like almost, I guess, what we call like a prophetic vision. So did they physically leave? Did they prophetically leave? Either way, they have this dramatic spiritual event. Veiluin, who were the 4 people? Ben Azai, Ben Zoma, Acher. I will say Acher is Elisha ben Avuya. We'll see why it's called Acher. But Rabbi Akiva. Amar Rabbi Akiva. So we'll say Rabbi Akiva was like leading the journey here. Rabbi Akiva says, Kisha'atem agien eitzel avnei shayishtar al tomru mayim mayim. When you get to a part in the Pardes that's pure marble, it looks like water. But whatever you do, don't call it water. Whatever you do, don't call it water. Why? Mishum shene'amar dover shkarim lo yikon leneged einai. Because Rabbi say in Shamayim, there is no room for sheker. Right? The essence of HaKadosh Baruch Hu is emes, is absolute, unequivocal truth. And there is no room for anything that's less than emes in the presence of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So Rabbi Akiva says, when you go ahead and you get there and something looks like water, it's not water. It's not water. Whatever you do, don't call it water. We'll say, isn't it incredible that when you're close to, we live in a world often where MS is so elusive. So elusive. It's so hard to find MS. Even once you find MS, it's not always clear that it's MS. And even after you find it and it's clear, you could still pervert it. But in the Olama MS, there is only unequivocal MS. And those who speak Sheker, there's no room for them. So we'll say, what happens? What happened to everybody? Ben Azai hits its umes. Ben Azai saw what was happening in the Pardes, and he died. Alava Kasuv Omer, Yakar be'eni Hashem hamafsa lechasidov. Ben Zoma hits its v'nifka. Ben Zoma saw what was going on in Pardes, and he lost his mind. V'nifka means he literally just went insane. Alava Kasuv Omer, Dvash matzasa echol dayecha pentis be'enovaka also. We'll say literally again, about Ben Azai, it says, it is precious in the eyes of Hashem, the death of his pious ones. About Ben Zoma, quotes the pasuk, you found delicious honey, don't eat too much lest you come to vomit. So the idea is apparently Ben Zoma had this spiritual overload and was unable to process, unable to handle that which he saw. Acher, Elisha ben Avuya, Kitetz ben Etios. Kitetz ben Etios means he uprooted saplings. We'll see what that means. Rabbi Akiva, Yatsa b'Shalom. We'll say, isn't this incredible? The four went in, only Rabbi Akiva came out unscathed. Shalu es ben Zoma. So we'll say, so again, that's the story. Now the Gemara kind of goes off a little bit on a tangent. Now that we mentioned the name of some of these sages, we'll go a little bit on a tangent, and then we're going to loop back to the story in just a little bit. So Shalu ben Zoma malu saruse kalbo. They asked Ben Zoma an interesting shayla. Are you allowed to go ahead and castrate or neuter, right, an animal? So Amar Lahem uba'artzechem lo sasu. Ultimately, in your land, I will say, here's what's interesting. What the Torah discusses when it comes to castrating an animal, ultimately is that a castrated animal can't be offered up as a carbon. So what they're asking is, okay, I understand for carbonic purposes, but am I allowed to do this to my own animal? To which the pasuk says, "Ba'artzechem lo sasu." No, kol sheba'artzechem lo sasu. You're not allowed to go ahead and castrate any of your animals, right? Forget not just sacrificial animals. Even your privately owned chulin animals, you're not allowed to do as well. Shalu es ben Zoma. They asked Ben Zoma, Besula she'ibra ma'al kohen gadol. It was an interesting shayla. What happens if a woman who is a virgin becomes pregnant? She becomes pregnant. So I will say, ultimately, again, is she permitted to marry a kohen gadol? So I will say, so now listen to what's happening. Let's analyze this just a little bit over here. So I'll say, so look at Rashi. Besula shibra. So remember, a kohen gadol, right? The high priest has to marry a besula. Has to marry a woman who's a basula, who's a virgin. So we'll say, so what happens? This woman is a basula, but she is pregnant. So Rashi says, V'hi omeres sheyimtzu la besulim, inami kohen gadol nasa v'lo yada shimu uberes umatzav besulim. I will say, they're talking about over here a woman where the besulim, the hymen is still intact. So ultimately, again, so b'metzios, she's a basula. She's a basula, yet we know she's pregnant. I will say, now, to be clear, let's see. So I'll say, says the Gemara. So what's the halacha? Michashina l'dishmuel. So I'll say, so how do we deal with this case? Are we choshesh for the position of Shmuel? Now, what does Shmuel say? Damar Shmuel, top of Tezvav. Yochol ani live al kama bi'ilos below dam. Shmuel says that there's a way to have relations without rupturing the basulim, so that the basulim could still remain intact. But ultimately, again, the woman had relations. So in other words, Shmuel is saying there is a way technically to have biyah without damaging the basulim. Again, I will say, remember, just to be clear, Judaism does not subscribe to the idea that to virgin birth, right, or virgin conception. The idea over here is that Shmuel is pointing out that there is a way for the physical basulim to remain intact, but at the end of the day, for the woman to have had relations. So the Gemara says, "Oh, Dilma, l'dishmo lo shchich," or maybe not. Maybe we don't assume that relations could occur without rupturing the basulim. And what happens? So the Gemara says, "Amar lahu l'dishmo lo shchiach." No, we don't assume that bia could occur without rupturing the basulim. So we'll say, so how then does a woman become pregnant with her basulim still intact? To which the Gemara says, listen to this case. V'chashinan shema ba'ambati ibra. Perhaps again, she became pregnant from zera, from semen inside of a bath. Meaning what? What are we concerned about over here? That maybe again, she used the same body of water as a man had used. A man had ejaculated into the bath, and ultimately that zera impregnates her. So the Gemara says, okay. So the Gemara says, V'amar Shmuel, Kol shichvas zera she'ina yorek echetz ina mazras. But Shmuel said, if the zera does not come out with force, then ultimately it cannot impregnate. To which the Gemara says, Meikara nami yorek echetz Chava. No, when it came out of the man, it came out with force, and such zera has the ability to impregnate. So I will say, it's actually, if you look at Rashi says over here, Ba'ambati, Klisha rochtzin bo kol hagofi, Yeshomar she'tiach sham adam shechva zera, v'nechas v'nechas. Both say, I just want to point out to you something absolutely amazing, just so you understand the greatness of the Torah. So we'll say, so let's go back to this for just a moment. So they asked Ben Zoma, what's the status of this woman, right? So again, a kohen gadol can only marry a besula. This woman has the besulim intact, but she's pregnant. So there's one of two possibilities. Either she had relations, but like Shmuel says, there's the ability to have relations while the basulim are still intact, Or maybe she became pregnant from floating zera, right? Maybe she just used the same bath as someone else and ultimately, again, became pregnant from that zera. So I will say, so Ben Zoma seems to feel that we don't really feel like Shmuel's possibility is a viable possibility. That bia, while keeping the basulim intact, is really all that possible. So maybe we are choshesh ultimately again for the floating zera. I will say, I will just tell you you see a Gemara like this, you say, wow, this is pretty wild, right? It's pretty wild, like, right? This wakes you up in the morning, right? I'll say, but what I will point out is something very interesting. Just understand, a Gemara like this has dramatic ramifications. The whole field and the whole halachic discussion regarding IVF, in vitro fertilization, things like that, which take zera, which takes semen from outside of the body and do things with it. But we'll say a lot of it is gleaned from this sugya, how you establish paternity. So I just want to point out, sometimes you see these Gemaras and like, that is absolutely wild. It is absolutely wild, that is true. But Lamaisa, just understand how fascinating it is that sometimes the things that we look at, that we say have no shaykhus at all, actually have dramatic shaykhus for contemporary halacha. Again, not our topic for now. Both say, so just understand, the only reason we're bringing this down over here is because of Ben Zoma. That's the connection. So listen to this story. There was one story, Reuven Ben Chananya was standing on a step on Harabayis. Incredible. We should be zocha. All of us should be zocha. V'ra'o Ben Zoma, right? And Ben Zoma saw him. V'lo amad milafanav, and Ben Zoma did not stand up. So the Gemara says, Amar lo me'ayin ula'ayin Ben Zoma. So we'll say Rabbi Yeshua Ben Chananya was a little bit surprised that Ben Zoma didn't stand up for him. So he says, Ben Zoma, me'ayin ula'ayin, right? What's going on with you, right? Where are you going, right? Where are you going? Where are you coming from? What are you preoccupied with that you didn't stand up for me when you saw me? So the Gemara says, Amar lo, so we'll say, by the way, I want to point out, this is not Rabbi Yeshua Ben Chananya. You see a Gemara like this, it's Rabbi Yeshua Ben Chananya, such a Bal Gaiva that you need to stand up for you. Rabbi will say, remember again, Rabbi Yeshua Ben Chananya is the senior sage, right? He's older. We'll say, people don't learn respect unless you teach them respect. And part of what a parent teaches a child is how to respect him. You see, sometimes parents think that it's like self-serving and it's egotistic to teach your child how to respect you. If no one teaches you, you never learn. If a Rebbe doesn't teach his Talmud that, you have to stand up. Rabbi Yeshua says that you have to stand. How is the Talmud going to know? Right? So I will say again, people don't know what they don't know. And this is an incredible yesod. Sometimes we think our children should know how to respect us, but did we ever teach them what actual respect means? Did we ever show them, model for them, tell them that this is how or model for them also, or how we respect our parents, what that means, right? A Talmud should know what to. Did the Rebbe tell the Talmud what the expectations are? So it's not Rabbi Yeshua Ben Chananya being demanding of his covet. It's Rabbi Yeshua Ben Chananya being a Rebbe and teaching the Talmud what's appropriate. So I'm sorry. So he says to him, Ben Zoma, what's going on? Right? What are you preoccupied with? Amalei. So let's listen to this. So Ben Zoma says, Rabbi, I was occupied with trying to figure out the distance between the upper waters and the lower waters. By the way, excellent answer, right? Excellent answer. Right? So again, remember, this goes back to my Sebereshis. We know the Rakia divides between the Mayim Alyonim and Mayim Tachtonim. So he says, Rebbe, I'm sorry, wasn't Chas Shalom a slight, trying to figure out the distance. Ve'ein bein zeh ela shalosh etzbos bilvad. And there's only 3 finger breaths, right? Shalosh etzbos, 3 finger breaths distance between the Mayim Alyonim and Mayim Tachtonim. Alright, so the Gemara says, Rashi says, Ve'ein beinehem b'mokom chiburan mokom kishrei kipas harakia bekarka. That pretty much, we'll say the rakia kind of extends down to the karka, to the earth, 3 finger breaths difference. Good. So the Gemara says, Shnei Amar, the Pasuk says, V'ruach Elokim rachefes al penei hamayim. The Pasuk says, the Spirit of Hashem hovered over the water. Ki Yona shemerachefes al baneha, like a dove that hovers over its young, ve'eno nagas, but ultimately doesn't directly touch them. Amar Rabbi Yeshua Tamid, I will say first white line. Rabbi Yeshua said to his students, Adayin ben Zoma mibachutz. Ben Zoma, he's still outside, right? He's still standing there. I will say that expression, Adayin mibachutz, means he doesn't get it. Like he hasn't even entered the building. He's incorrect. The pasuk says that the Spirit of Hashem hovered over the water. Now, remember, when was that said? B'yom Harishon. Both said that was on the first day of Ma'aseh Bereishis. Havdalah, but yet the distinction between the upper waters and the lower waters, B'yom Sheni hu dahabi. That happened on the second day. D'chsiv v'hi mavdil bein mayim lemayim. So here you have Ben Zoma. Here you have Ben Zoma bringing a raya that there's a very small distinction between the upper waters and the lower waters based on a pasuk from day one. Here's the problem. The upper waters and lower waters were divided when? Day 2. So therefore, again, so it says Rabbi Yeshua ben Chananya, and in reality, how much is the distinction? How much is the difference between the upper waters and the lower waters? Amar Rav Acha bar Yaakov, Kimali Nima, a hair's breadth. A hair's breadth. So I will say, so ultimately, again, what that tells you is something really very interesting. That we often have this idea that the Rakia created this major divide between upper waters and lower waters, but it turns out that the upper waters and lower waters pretty much almost touch each other. Right? There's a hair's breadth difference between them. V'Rabbanan ki guda de gamla. The Rabbanan will say it's like planks of a bridge. Rashi says, Guda de Gamla, Kishemisadrin Luchin Shal Gesher, Zu Eitzel Zu, E'afsha Shalotehe Revach Ben Saim. So we'll say this is interesting. You know, apparently when you place down wood planks for a bridge, it's fascinating. You can't place them like exactly pressed against each other. Why not? I guess the reason is because when it becomes hot, when it becomes warm, so the wood expands. Right? So if they're exactly close to each other, then you'll ruin the bridge. You have to leave like a tiny little bit of space. So that's the imagery that they're giving for how the upper waters and the lower waters are situated next to each other. They're right next to each other, and there's like a little bit of space in between the two. Incredible. Marzutra v'yitem Ravasi Amar kitreglimi de prisi ahadadi. Marzutra, some Ravasi say it's like two articles of clothing, one on top of the other. So I will say, so again, literally, they're pressed right up against each other. But Amrilei kitre kasi de sachifi adadi. Two cups, one inside the other. So I will say, so now we go back to the story of the Pardes. Remember again, so we have again Ben Azai, Ben Zoma, Rabbi Akiva, Acher, Rabbi Akiva. Ben Azai died. Ben Zoma went insane. Rabbi Akiva came out unscathed, and the fourth was Elisha ben Avuya, who becomes known as Acher. So Acher kitzeitz benetios. So we'll say the way the Gemara describes about what happened to Acher is that Acher uprooted saplings. Now, what does that mean? So the Gemara says, Alava Kasuv Omer, about Acher, it says, now say, if you take a look at Rashi, the way Rashi understands Acher kitzeitz benetios is kilkel ve'ives. So we'll say, what's the imagery of uprooting a sapling? Right, a sapling needs to be left in the ground in order to grow. If you uproot it, you prevent its growth. According to Rashi, kitzeitz benetios means Acher uprooted fundamentals in Torah. He fundamentally misunderstood things, thereby uprooting certain concepts, preventing them from growing and fully maturing. We're going to see them. There's a much more pashut pshat in why the Gemara says that Acher was kitzeitz benetios. So let's go weiter. So the Gemara says as follows. So what happened? So the Gemara says, Halava kasav omer, al titin es picha lachti es pisarecha. About Acher, the pasuk says, literally, don't allow your mouth to cause your flesh to sin. So Maihi, what happened to Acher? So we'll say, get ready for this. So Acher comes into the Pardes, right? So he ascends into Shamayim. So the Gemara says, he comes up, and what does he see? He sees the Malach Metatron. So there's an angel Metatron. Now Metatron is one of the big Malachim, right? One of the significant Malachim. He sees that Metatron is sitting, and what is Metatron? Metatron is sitting, and he is writing down the merits of Klal Yisrael. Amar Sa'achar, right? Elisha ben Avuya sees this. He says, Gemir dilamayla lo habi lo yeshiva, velo tachros, velo oref, velo ipui. So Elisha ben Avuya says, how is Metatron sitting? We have a tradition that in Shamayim there's no sitting. Right, the malachim don't sit. There's no sitting because it's a lack of covenant in front of the Shekhinah. So ultimately, again, there's no sitting. Rabbi say it's interesting. Tachros, Rabbi say, means literally competition. There's no competition. What does that mean? As opposed to in this world where there's a severe sense of competition, in the Olam HaEmes there's no competition. Right, the malachim know their place. Everyone has their place, and there's no sense of competition. Lo oref. There's no back of the neck. We'll say same idea. Same way no one sits. Ultimately, again, no one turns the back of their neck to the Shekhinah also. V'lo ipui. We'll say this is incredible. V'lo ipui means no one's ever tired. We'll say, can you imagine that? Right? No one's ever tired, right? There's no such thing as being tired. In other words, there's a certain sense of ongoing energy in the Olam HaEmes. Now, we'll say, so what bothered Elisha ben Avuya was, how was Metatron sitting? Shema Chasa Shalom Bezer Shuyo, saying maybe Metatron is God. So what Elisha ben Avuya, what he happened was when he saw Metatron and he saw Metatron sitting. So remember, we have a Masorah, the only entity that sits in Shamayim is HaKadosh Baruch Hu. He sees Metatron. I thought that was Metatron, but maybe that's God, and maybe there are two gods. Chas Shalom. That's what happened with Elisha ben Avuya. He sees Metatron sitting. He thinks there's two gods. So we'll say what happened. Afku l'metatron umechvin shisin pulsi dinura. So first of all, HaKadosh Baruch Hu punished Metatron. He punished Metatron with, I'll say literally again, shisin pulsi dinura. 60 lightning lashes, whatever that means. Amarle, my taima ki chazise lo kamta mikame. So ultimately, again, because he said to Metatron, you should have known better. When Elisha ben Avuya and everyone else came into the paradise, you should have stood up. You should have stood up, because at the end of the day, you should have stood up, because again, you should have realized that they could have made this mistake. But I will say, nevertheless, Elisha ben Avuya pretty much establishes for himself that there must be two gods. I will say what happens in Elisha ben Avuya's theological, downfall is he thinks there's two gods, and then ultimately, again, he goes from two gods to no gods. As a result, Isyai v'le reshusa l'mechak zechusa da'acher. So ultimately, again, Metatron was given permission to erase all of the merits of Elisha ben Avuya. So I will say this. So again, Elisha ben Avuya clearly was not ready for this journey. He therefore again gleans erroneous theological assumptions, and as a result, and becomes a heretic. Really becomes an apikoris afterwards. We're going to see. And as a result, Metatron was given permission to erase all of his merits. Yotzes Abaskol V'Amar. As a result of this, Abaskol came out and said, Shuvu banim shovevim chutz me'acher. Baskol came out and said the pasuk the Gemara is quoting is Shuvu banim shovevim. Return, O wayward children. The pasuk Yirmiyahu Hanavi. So the pasuk comes out. So right, the Baskol comes out and says it's a call to tshuva. Right, Hashem says every day the Baskol comes out. Return to Hashem. Chutz me'acher. Except Acher. Amar, so Acher, Elisha ben Avuya hears this. I want to point out, the Medrash has a much more extensive description of the negative behaviors of Elisha ben Avuya. Shabbos, you have to understand what actually happened. Elisha ben Avuya leaves the fold. He ingratiates himself with the Romans. Now, the Romans are all too happy to have a defector rabbi. Right? They give him title, they give him wealth, and he becomes an antagonist of the Jewish people. That's what happened. You don't see this. The Gemara doesn't record this. The Medrash records this. So it's not just the pshat that Elisha ben Avuya, becomes an apikores, right? But ultimately, again, he becomes antagonistic. He becomes antagonistic to the Jewish people. Now, the story is not finished. So therefore, the Baskol comes out, Shuvu banim shovevim chutz me'acher. Acher, the door to tshuva is close to you. Amar, so Acher says, Hoil v'itrit hahu gavra me'ahu alma lepuk lishani b'hai alma. So you know what? Acher says, you know what? Fine. If I have no olam haba, if olam haba is gone for me, I might as well live it up in this world. If I've lost the world to come, I might as well maximize this world. What happened? Nafuk Acher letar b'surah. Acher goes off the derech. Tarbus right goes off and engages in terrible behavior. Rabbi say, what does he do? Nafak ashkach zona tava. He finds a prostitute and he propositions her. Right? He wants to engage her services. Rabbi say, I just want to point out something amazing. Rabbi say, so look what the Gemara just said. Right? Acher, he hears the Baskel, and the Baskel says, you have no portion in the world to come. Right? You have no opportunity for tshuva. What's the first thing he does? The first thing he does, finds a zona. Rabbi say, isn't this incredible? What did we just learn on Yud Aleph Amud Beis? Gezel va'arayos nafsho mechamdaslan v'tavaslan. Both say, the Gemara says, the strongest desire we have is right immorality. The strongest desire, right? It doesn't say that Acher went to get a cheeseburger, right? Or that Acher says, whip me up some basar b'chalav, or let me wear a little shatnez, right? Nothing, right? The first thing Acher does is he finds a zona. And I will say, by the way, finding a zona, both say there are plenty of ways to be immoral, and not have to pay for it, right? Plenty of ways to be immoral, but a zona, right? Engaging the services of a zona, if you think about it to a certain degree, is almost like the paradigmatic example of immorality. So isn't it incredible? The first thing he does, it's so important to be self-aware about the pushes and pulls that exist inside of us. And the moment, see, for Acher, he spent his whole life keeping these things in check. Right? And then the moment he no longer has to keep it in check, the first thing he does, engages in his incredible story. Amrele, Velav Elisha ben Avuyat. The Rebbe say, even a zona has standards, right? She's like, aren't you Elisha ben Avuya? I mean, you're the Gadol Hadar, or one of the Gedolei Hadar. This is a little bit awkward for both of us, right? In other words, that right? You're Elisha ben Avuya. So Rebbe say, watch this. Akar pugla mimishra b'Shabbos. Rebbe say, by the way, you know what the rest of the story was? Do you know when he engaged a zona? He went to a zona on Shabbos. On Shabbos. I guess zonos work on Shabbos also, right? So he goes to the zona on Shabbos. She says to him, aren't you Elisha ben Avuya? What does he do? He pulls a radish out of the ground. So we'll say, remember again, pulling a radish out of the ground is the malacha of Ketzira. Right? So that's one of the 39 malachas. Essentially what he does is, he's mechalel Shabbos right in front of her. And she says, Amra acherhu. You must be someone else. You must be someone else. So Rabbi say, it's a very profound Gemara. First of all, you also understand this is also perhaps why the Gemara calls Acher Chotzetz Benetios. He uprooted saplings, because the dramatic act that ultimately, again, was his public departure from Yiddishkeit was the act of pulling the radish out of the ground on Shabbos. But Rabbi say, isn't it incredible? Why do they call him Acher? This zona says, Acherhu. You're clearly someone else. Rabbi say, when you read those words, it's painful. She says to him, whether she's saying Acherhu, I must have you, confused with someone, or she's saying, no, you are Elisha ben Avuya, but clearly you've become someone else. Such a dramatic statement. Acher. So say the Gemara goes on. So Sha'al Acher Saimer. So say, just again, the unwritten part of the story over here is the entire rabbinic community distances themselves from Elisha ben Avuya. Right? Elisha ben Avuya has become an apigoris. Elisha ben Avuya has ingratiated himself with the Romans. Elisha ben Avuya is antagonistic to the Jewish people. So everyone has distanced themselves from Elisha ben Avuya except for one man, Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Meir was a Talmud of Acher, of Elisha ben Avuya. And Rabbi Meir refuses to distance himself from his Rebbe. Sha'al Aches Rabbi Meir la'achar she'atz latar v'sra. So Rabbi say, and here's the amazing word. The Gemara is going to record a series of Torah conversations that Elisha ben Avuya has with Rabbi Meir after Elisha ben Avuya left the fold. So Acher asks Rabbi Meir. So Rabbi say, by the way, the reason also the Gemara calls Elisha ben Avuya Acher is the pasuk says V'shem Rishaim Yirkov. Shem Rishaim Yirkov. Ultimately, the names of the wicked should rot. There's a concept of not saying the names of wicked people. Right? Again, so therefore again the Gemara calls him Acher. So what happens? So Acher asks Rabbi Meir, La'acher Shetzat B'Sra Amrlei, so he asks Rabbi Meir, also watch this. He asks Rabbi Meir, Mai Dichsiv V'gam Ezel U'ma Ze Asa Salokim. What is the meaning of the pasuk? that we read in Koheles. The gam as zeh lu'umazeh. This corresponds to this. What does that mean? So Rameir says, Amarlo, Kol Mashi bara Kodesh Baruch Hu bara kenegdo, whatever Hashem created in the world, He created something similar to it. Bara harim, bara gvos. He created mountains, created hills. Bara yamim, bara naros. He created great seas. He created rivers. Amarlo, so we'll say, watch this. Achar says Rabbi Meir. You know, Meir, Amarlo, Rabbi Akiva, Rabcha lo Amarkach. Rabbi Meir, your Rebbe, did not say Rabbi. So we'll say, this is Elisha ben Avuya telling Rabbi Meir, nah, I don't think your interpretation of the pasuk is right. Let me tell you what Rabbi Akiva said about the pasuk. Ella, bara tzadikim, bara rishoyim. Zelu masin, Chashbar created opposites. He created tzadikim, He created rishoyim. Bara gan Eden, bara Gehenna. Hashem created Gan, Hashem created Gehenna. Kol echad ve'echad. Said, listen to this drasha of Elisha ben Avuya. Kol echad ve'echad. Every single person. Yesh lo beis chalokim. Echad began Eden, ve'echad beGehenna. I will say each and every one of us has a choice in life. We could be a tzaddik, we could be a rasha, and therefore each and every one of us has two portions. I have one portion in Gan Eden and one portion in Gehenna. I will say there's a lot. There's a lot with my name on it in Gan Eden, and there's a lot with my name on it in Gehenna. Zacha tzaddik natal chelka v'chelik chaveiro began Eden. If I'm zocha to be a tzaddik, ultimately, again, I'll get my portion and my friend's portion in Gan Eden. Nischayev rasha natal chelka v'chelik chaveiro begehenna. And if chas shalom I do wrong, then ultimately I'll get my portion and my friend's portion in Gehenna. And I will say the idea being that if I make the right choices, I'll get my portion and someone else's portion who didn't make the right choices, right? And if I make the wrong choices, I'll get my portion and the person who made the right choices. So we'll say, isn't this an incredible yisod? Think about this in life. There are two, what's the home, right? There are two condos waiting for me, right? Two townhouses waiting for me, right? One in Olam Haba, one in Gan Eden, and one in Gehenna. I always say, so the only shaila is which one am I moving into after the 120? But they're both there, and they're both titled to me. Because at the end of the day, I have a shaykhis to both of them, depending on whether or not I become a tzaddik or a rasha. Overwhelming. Amram Misharshia, Maikra Gabe Tzadikim, Ksiv Ilachein Ba'artsa Mishnah Yershu Gabe. Shem Ksiv, U Mishnah Shivron Shivram. But another exchange. Shal Achas Ramin Alach Shiatza Tarbasra. So we'll say again, this case, so we'll say again, what's amazing about these Gemaras is it's Elisha ben Avuya engaging Rabbi Meir in Torah discourse. In Torah discourse. And we'll say we're going to, well, let's go through it. The Gemara says, My Dichsiv, Lo Ya'archena Zav, Uzechuchis, Utmurasa Klepaz. So yes, says Rabbi Meir, tell me, what's the meaning of the pasuk? What's the meaning in the pasuk? Ultimately, again in Eov, Lo Ya'archena Zav, we'll say, it's more valuable than gold. Or Uzechuchis, Utmurasa Klepaz, it's more valuable than gold. Or white glass. And it's can't be exchanged even for fine gold. What does that mean? Amrullah Meir says, Elu divrei Torah, shekash leknosek klei zav uklei paz, v'nochen la'adlen klei zchuchis. So Meir says this refers to Torah. But it's such a beautiful drasha. Torah is as difficult to acquire as gold, right? Because remember, just like gold is expensive, difficult to acquire. So to acquire Torah really, really requires effort. Remember, there's a difference ultimately again between learning Torah and acquiring Torah, right? If anyone could learn. Acquiring it means you make it part of you. It becomes part of you. And being part of you means it informs and it shapes the way you live. So learning Torah is easy. Acquiring Torah and ultimately, again, making it your own, using it to inform shit, that's as difficult to do as acquiring gold. It's acquiring gold. V'nocha la'abdan. But it's easy to lose Torah just like a glass. I'll say just like glass easily shatters, and it's incredible. A person could acquire Torah and could lose it just like that. We'll say we know this, right? I could spend a lifetime acquiring ruchnias, and one bad decision could send me on a downward spiral. Amrlo, to which Elisha ben Avuya says, Rabbi Akiva Rav Chalo Amar Kach. Rabbi Akiva, your Rabbi didn't darshan it like this. Elamakli zav kli zchuchis afapi shenishbara yeshlem takana. Aftam Chacham Shesarach Yeshlo Takana. Listen to these words. Elisha ben Avuya says to Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Akiva a different drasha. Rabbi Akiva's drasha was that this pasuk refers to a Talmud Chacham who went off the derech. Rabbi say Sarach means spoiled. A Talmud Chacham who went putrid. Talmud Chacham who made bad life decisions and therefore as a result has gone down the wrong path. Just like if a gold utensil or even glass breaks, you could melt it down and reforge it. So to a Talmud Chacham who makes terrible life choices is not beyond redemption and salvation. Rabbi say, do you just hear the drasha that Elisha ben Avuya just said? The drasha Elisha ben Avuya just said that no one is beyond salvation. Rabbi Meir says, Amar lo av ata chazar b'cha. Rabbi Meir says, Rebbe, do tshuva. Rabbi Meir says, Rebbe, do tshuva. Come back. Amar lo. Chavar shamati mi'achori apargod. Shuvu banim shovim chutz mi'achar. So Elisha ben Avuya says to Rabbi Meir, I would. Or at least I think about it. But I already heard from behind the curtain, return a wayward children except for Acher. There's no place for me. Kadosh Baruch Hu doesn't want to let me in. Another story I will say. Listen to this story. Elisha ben Avuya is riding a horse on Shabbos. And Rabbi Meir is literally following behind him on horseback to learn Torah from him. Right? He's literally going ahead and riding behind him on horseback to learn Torah from him. So I'll say, now watch this. So what's happening over here? So Amar lo Meir, chazur lacharecha. So I'll say, what happens? So you have Elisha ben Avuya, right? So Rabbi Meir is walking behind him. Elisha ben Avuya is riding on horseback. And he says, Meir, you have to turn back. Shekvar shi'arti be'ikvei susi ad kan tchum Shabbos. So I'll say, so first of all, what's interesting to note over here is something absolutely amazing, which is Elisha ben Avuya is keeping in mind the number of steps, right, for the tchum. So you have to turn back. Right, we're about to get to the tchum, you have to turn back. Amar le, af ata chazar b'cha. So Rabbi Meir says, you know what, Elisha, right, Rabbi, come back with me. Why don't you come back also? I'll go back. In other words, we'll both enter back into the proverbial Tchum Shabbos together. So ultimately, again, Elisha ben Avuya said, I would, but I already told you, I heard from behind the curtain, return all wayward children except for Achra. HaKadosh Baruch Hu doesn't want me. HaKadosh Baruch Hu has no place for me. Takfei Ayli Lebe Midrasha. So Rabbi say at this point in time, Rabbi say you understand what's happening over here. We'll discuss it a little bit more in depth tomorrow, but understand the profundity of what it is that's occurring over here. Rabbi say that here you have Elisha ben Avuya. Elisha ben Avuya doesn't say no, right? He doesn't say no. I don't care. He says, I heard HaKadosh Baruch Hu says there is no place for me. So almost as if Elisha ben Avuya is entertaining this possibility. Takve Ayla Midrasha. So ultimately, again, so what happens? So Rabbi Meir takes Elisha ben Avuya, grabs him, pulls him into the base medrash. Amrlei liyanuka psokli pisukech. So Elisha ben Avuya says to one of the children, tell me, what are you learning? Now we'll say, now what does that have to do with anything? So understand, we know that even in an age, the Gemara says, even when there's no nevuah, you'll find nevuah often with children and shotim, children and insane people. Meaning, in other words, that sometimes children say things that are of prophetic import. Not that child realizes what they're saying is of prophetic import, but sometimes children say things that are of prophetic import. So the Gemara says, Amrlo, ki im techabsi beneser v'tabilach boris, nechtam avonech lefonai. So I will say, so ultimately again, so what happens? Oh, did I skip? I'm sorry. In Shalom, Hashem l'Rishayim. So the child says, this is what the child says. Child says, what are we learning? We're learning the pasuk that says there is no peace for the wicked. Okay, that didn't work out well. So ultimately, again, Rabbi Meir takes Elisha ben Avuya to another base medrash. Tell me, what are you learning? Even if you wash yourself, the stain of your sin remains. I will say these psukim do not bode well for Elisha ben Avuya because they seem to indicate that no matter what Elisha ben Avuya does, right, the sin of his sin will stick. So he goes to another base medrash. Amar le yanuka amud beis psokli psukech. Tell me, what are you learning? So Amar le va'at shedud ma ta'asi kisil b'shishani kisad yad izav kisekri v'pochinayich lashav tisyafi. No matter what you do, no matter how you try to pretty yourself, ultimately it will not work. He brings him to another base medrash. Brings him to 13 different bati medrash, 13 different shuls. And I will say again, what Rabbi Meir is trying to do is to give Elisha ben Avuya a glimmer of hope. And all he needs is to give Elisha ben Avuya like one little pasuk that seems to indicate that what? That there's a hope for tshuva, and maybe Elisha ben Avuya would turn it around. So I will say he took him to 13 different shuls, Kulu paskile ki gavna, and ultimately, again, each and every time, the story was kind of the same, that the psukim that the children told him were all psukim that seemed to indicate that he was beyond salvation. But say, listen to this. So the Gemara says, so he brings him to the last shul. He says to the kid, to the child there, tell me what you're learning. That Hashem says to the Rasha, Hashem says to Rasha Tilim, right, to the Rasha, Hashem says, why should you talk about my statutes? Right, that Hashem doesn't even want the Rasha talking about Torah. So listen, I watch this. This child had a little bit of like a speech impediment, or just spoke. He stuttered, or he stumbled over his words. Ishtama kimad amar le'u Elisha amar Elokim. So listen, I watch this. When the child spoke, he stammered a little bit, and instead of saying ula Rasha, it sounded like he said ula Elisha. Ula Elisha amar Elokim malach alasabachuki. Now, I will say at this point, the Gemara says, Ike da Amri, Sakina hava bahadei, Vikare, Vishadje letleisar benekinishta. So I will say one version of this story is Elisha ben Avuya got so angry that he killed the child, chopped him up into 13 pieces, and sent a piece of the child to each of the 13 Batei Medrash that had rejected Elisha ben Avuya. Ike da Amri, others have another version of this story. Amri have biyade sakina have karenale. Others say that Elisha ben Avuya said to the kid, if I had a knife in my hand, I would cut you up into a bunch of pieces. I will say, now, by the way, the story tells you a little bit of where Elisha ben Avuya was holding. Right? In other words, killing children, chopping them up, or even threatening to kill children is an indication ultimately again of where Elisha is holding. But it's something else. You would think to yourself, Elisha ben Avuya was so far removed. So what does he care? I will say, because here's the difference. No matter how far one is removed, no one ever wants to feel rejected. And when Elisha ben Avuya goes place to place to place and is rejected over and over and over again, you know what happens when people feel rejected? They do bad things. Because when you reject someone, what you're effectively saying is you're worthless. Well, if I'm worthless, then it doesn't really matter what I do. So if you're going to tell Elisha ben Avuya, isn't this incredible? Remember, Elisha ben Avuya left. He left, but he left of his own volition. There's a difference between me walking out on my own versus you telling me that I am rejected. If I walk out on my own, that's my decision. You rejecting me is you telling me what you think of me. And now what you're telling me is you think I can't make it. You think I can't do it. You think I'm not worthy. Well, if you're going to reject me, then I'm going to act like a rejected person. I will say it's such an incredible yesod. So what happens? So the Gemara says, Kinach nafshe. Now I will say Elisha ben Avuya dies, right? He dies. I will say there's so much more to stay on this story, which let's get a little bit more in the Gemara. Then in Mirz Hashem, we're gonna say a little bit more about this. Kinach nafshe. When Elisha ben Avuya died, Kinach nafshe da'acher. Amrile lo meidin l'danabos, say, get ready for this. When Elisha ben Avuya died, the Beis Din Shalmala, the celestial court, did not know what to do with him. They don't know how to judge. They didn't know how to judge him. Which means what? Lo meidin l'danin, lo la'amudasi, v'lo meidin l'danin, Lo meidin l'daini, v'lo la'amudasi. We can't send Elisha ben Avuya to Gehenna, nor can we send to Olam Haba. Why not? So the Gemara says, lo meidin l'daini, first intermediate white line, we can't send them to Gehenna, mishum da'asak ba'oraisa. Wow. We can't send them to Gehenna, you know why? Because he has all of this Torah. The Gemara says, v'lo la'amad da'asi, say mishum dechata. But ultimately, again, we can't send them to Olam Haba. We can't send them to Olam Haba either because he sinned. I will say, do you see how powerful Torah is? Elisha ben Avuya, who mamish acted like a Rasha. They can't send him to Gehenna because of his Torah. Amar Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Meir says, Mutav diladaine velesi la'alma da'asi. So Rabbi Meir says, no, send him to Gehenna. Sending him. We'll say now. Sending him. Why? Let him have his judgment. Remember again, because Mishpat Rishon Begehenna Yud Beis Chodesh, the longest he's going to stay in Gehenna is for 12 months. Let him have his time in Gehenna. Let him be cleansed, then purged, and then he'll go to Gan Eden. Masai Amos ve'ela Asher mikirbo. So listen to this. Rabbi Meir says, when I die, I'm going to take the neshama of Elisha ben Avuya down to Gehenna. Right? Let him spend his time in Gehenna. Let him have his judgments. Then he can come to Olam Haba. And the proof that I got Elisha ben Avuya in Gehenna was what? You're going to see smoke come up from the grave of Elisha ben Avuya. And when you see smoke come up from his grave, you will know that what? That I've been successful in getting him down to Gehenna. So Kinach Nafshed Meir, when Meir died, Salah Kutra Mikivrei Da'acher, sure enough, smoke began to rise from the grave of Elisha ben Avuya. So Rabbi says Rabbi Meir was therefore successful in bringing down the neshama of Elisha ben Avuya to Gehenna, getting him his din, his mishpat, so that ultimately he could be cleansed and brought back up to Gan Eden afterwards. I'm Rabbi Yochanan. Give word to the Mikli Rebbe. So Rabbi Yochanan says, is it a big deal to burn one's Rebbe? So it's a little bit strange. So Rabbi Yochanan says, Shkoyach, you got him down to Gehenna. Now who's getting him up to Gan Eden? So the Gemara says, I'm Rabbi Yochanan, word to the Rebbe, Chad Hava Binina, V'lo Matzina La'atzluye, Inakte Biyad Man Meramile. So Rabbi Yochanan said, I'm going to go down, right? I'm going to go down ultimately to Gehenna, bring up Elisha ben Avuya and save him. Amar Masai Amos ve'echva Asher mikivro. The raya will be, when I die, you will see that the smoke, we'll say the smoke rising from the grave of Elisha ben Avuya represents Elisha ben Avuya is in Gehenna. So Rabbi Yochanan says, when I die, you're going to see the smoke is going to stop because I will have taken Elisha ben Avuya up from Gehenna. Kinach nafshed Rabbi Yochanan pasa kutra mikivrei da'acher. Ultimately, and sure enough, when Rabbi Yochanan died, the smoke stopped rising from Elisha ben Avuya's grave. So Pasach Aliyahu Sabdano Afidu Shomer HaPesach Lo Amal Lefanecha Rabbeinu. When they eulogized Rabbi Yochanan, they said even the Shomer HaPesach, even the Malach who's in charge of Gehenna, couldn't stand in the way of Rabbi Yochanan. Right? Rabbi Yochanan marched right into Gehenna, got Elisha ben Avuya, and brought him up. Incredible. I will say, Pito shel acher asid lekamei de Rebbe. But this is so beautiful. So the daughter of Elisha ben Avuya once came before Rebbe. Amar le Rebbe Parnasani. So she was poor, and she said, Rebbe, can you help me with money? Amar la bat mi'at. So he said to him. So Rebbe said to this young woman, who are you? So she said, Amar lo Pito shel acher. She said, I am the daughter of Acher of Elisha ben Avuya. Amar la adayin yesh mizaro ba'olam. Is it possible that the offspring of Elisha ben Avuya still exists in this world? L'haksiv lo nin lo v'lo nechad ba'amo ve'in sribim gurav. Amar lo. So supposed to listen to this. So the daughter says, Rebbe, Zachar Taraso v'al tiskar ma'asav. If you could remember my father's Torah, right? My father's Torah, and don't remember his actions. They'll say, what a profound thing, right? So the daughter has to say, remember his Torah, don't remember his actions. Miyad yard the ish v'sichsicha safsalo shal Rebbe. In that moment, a fire came down and literally singed the bench of Rebbe, signaling that Rebbe spoke inappropriately. So Bacha Rebbe cried, Bacha v'amar Rebbe, umal limisganin bakach limishtabchin ba'alachas kama v'kama. If this ultimately, again, is the divine protection, that those who go ahead and deprecate, right, or go ahead and mistreat Torah get, then can you imagine, again, the covet that those who uphold Torah, in other words, that Rebbe was saying, it's amazing how in Shamayim, they were defending Elisha ben Avuya, right? They were defending Elisha ben Avuya, they were sticking up for his Torah. So Rebbe cried, if this is how those who go out and denigrate Torah are treated, like Elisha ben Avuya, then can you imagine the cover that is given to those who uphold Torah? So we'll have to stop over here for today. I will say, we're not finished with this story, right? We're not finished, and we still have to go back and understand the most troubling part of the story, which is the Bas Kol itself. A Bas Kol that says, Shuvu banam shovim chutz mi'acher. How could it be that HaKadosh Baruch Hu rejects anyone from the ability to do tshuva? Dramatic, so I will say, dramatic and overwhelming Gemara Mir session to be continued tomorrow. Shkoyach. Have a great day, everyone. Sorry.
So the Gemara says, "I actually got some time to straw." So all these discussions are looking at the curves. Is that
Next Gemara.
I thought it was coming soon.
Next Gemara. Where's Hashem?